Well, good morning, everybody. And it's Friday, the 14th of October, 2022. And this is episode 80 of Retuning Your Firm. Today, as always, we're looking at a number of different issues. We're looking at the whole issue of revenues and how can you actually sustain and grow your revenues. We're also looking at who's your ambassador, and we'll find a bit more about who that might be. And then what might a new life look like? So there's a whole range of quite interesting topics that we're hoping to cover. Just to introduce myself, if I may. Richard Chaplin, the founder and chief executive of the Managing Partners Forum, as I'm sure regulars will know well. And who am I joined by today? Well, firstly, I'm joined by Eddie Bowman. Now, Eddie is Eddie has recently left law firm Simmons & Simmons, having also been in a senior marketing BD role, and has done similar roles for EY and for other organizations. And he's going to be talking to us today about strategies and programs that drive revenue. Welcome, Eddie.
Thank you very much.
Our second panelist today is Mike Mister. Mike is a partner in a firm you may have heard about. The acronym is PSFI, which I believe stands for Professional Service Firms International. He's also an honorary professor in the School of Law at Queen Mary University of London and a senior fellow with the Conference Board's Human Capital Practice. So he's got a really interesting set of insights to bring. And his background was actually in financial services as well. So really has a good understanding. And he's got to give me quite an intriguing theme today of who are your ambassadors? And has recently written a book, came out in July, which I'm sure we'll be talking to a little bit more about later on. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks very much, Richard. Delighted to be here.
And our third, our regular panelist, Francesca Lagerberg. We've given up counting how many times she's been on the show, but it's certainly north of 50. And she is the chief executive of Baker Tilly International. And she said she'd like to talk a little bit about the 4-day week. So that's been an interesting extra theme to add in. I didn't know about that until a few minutes ago, so I didn't have time to update my summary themes, but I'm always happy to fit a new one in because I think it's a really interesting topic and looking forward to hearing her thoughts on that. Before we go on with the sort of show proper, I just wanted to kind of talk you through some forum news. And I think you know this, I've said every time, but there are literally hundreds of people who are watching the various videos from past shows every month. It's a free service, there's well over 200 now. And it's interesting how much ones that maybe even 2 years old are now, all of a sudden people are looking at them again. I think it's because somebody probably uses it in some of their publicity and everybody then watches it. But that's great. It's a fantastic resource and we're really pleased to bring you that knowledge. Second area, some of you will recall from earlier in the year, we ran our annual awards. We made a few changes for next year. So they're now going to be called the International Management Excellence Awards. And that reflects 2 points. One, because we do get firms from across the world that enter us, US, Europe, etc., something even as far as Australia. And secondly, it's really difficult to persuade somebody to take a plane in the hope they might go home with a trophy. So what we're going to be doing is continuing to remain in the virtual world. So the awards will remain online. Rather interesting online ceremony we're planning for next June. But that means we think that even more firms from across the world will now be looking to enter and see if they can too win an International Management Excellence Awards. And as you probably know, they're supported by Harvard Business Review and the Financial Times, which is two of the best brands around. So the 21st awards coming up we'll be going out shortly with a view to entering in about Jan, Feb, that sort of timescale. Mentor Match continues to do well. So if you're thinking of giving something back, if you're a mentor or meeting somebody who can help you as a mentee, then both, and you can do both at the same time, a number of middle managers of both. It's there and it's running quite nicely. It's been running about 6 months now, quite well established, I think. I mentioned last time we had an EA peer group, which is now active. EA is quite interesting because it's we hadn't really thought of it before, but like all the best ideas, you come from not from you, but from your clients. And a couple of managing partners said, we'd really like our EAs to get together in a peer group, please. So we've worked out a way to make that happen. And they've already had 2 meetings and they're really interested and excited. And Richard Thorby, who's the moderator, says that it's fascinating to hear how the issues are being looked at that level. And last Tuesday, I'm pleased to advise that the first management team together session since literally March 2020 took place, exploring ways to maintain your firm's culture. It went really well, full house, and really good session. I was on holiday, actually. Only came back yesterday, so I missed it. But apparently I'm told it was amazing. So that's good to hear. Let's move on. What I'm also now moving on to is the poll section of today's show. And for those of you who've done them before, obviously looking forward to your input today. We also get the same feedback. Your poll results are incredibly valuable in our analysis during these dynamic times. So we're very pleased that we're able to do that. I might just show you some of the feedback from the poll that you did, or those who are on the show 2 weeks ago did, which was our quarterly sector tracker. It's the one we do every couple of weeks, every month, every quarter, if you recall. And so what were the findings? Well, firms are expecting continued expansion, activity levels, new workflow, and headcount. There's clearly something strange going on in the UK at the moment, and this was done 2 weeks ago. It shows how much things may even have changed in that timescale, but this is what people thought on 30th of September. They felt that many of the firms were on track for COVID success, lovely expression, but actually none of their key clients were. So there's a bit of a mismatch there, because you might think you're doing amazingly and you've got really great prospects, but ultimately the clients are the only place you actually get money from. If you don't have money, you've got problems. In terms of what's important and where are people focusing, fairly the usual perennials, finance, people and marketing pretty much carry the most weight in partner discussions. But interesting, when you asked what were the top priorities for the leadership teams, a slightly different set emerged, one around tech usage, which I think partners really don't want to talk about at all, developing a clear purpose, which again is possibly a bit too wishy-washy for them, and operational efficiency, which is probably a little bit too detailed. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there, I think, between what's happening in the partner conversations and where the leadership teams are focusing their efforts. What's helping you get there? And we've got a lot of people today who are very focused on people-centric activities, particularly Mike. People-centric activities are seen as contributing most to achieving goals, and I suppose similarly, what's getting in the way? Employee turnover. There are more vacancies than unemployed people, according to the stats from the ONS currently. And then the lack of skills and talent. And so those are things that are preventing firms from achieving optimal performance. And lastly, but I don't think by any means least, this is really, I think, has settled down now. Most people expect to be working around half the time at home. Now, is that a 4-day week, or is that a 5-day week, spending half the time at home and half the time in the office? And again, we might be exploring that a little bit later. So that's a little bit of a feedback. I'm just going to show you a few quick slides. Blue, if you're on a small screen phone, you probably can't see these, but the blue one is the expansion, and the red one is contraction. And what you can see there is, and this goes back about 2 odd years, way back, Boris bounce territory was once called, back in sort of February 2020, before pandemic. All of a sudden, red took over. That was obviously when everybody was expecting considerable contraction, and that sort of tailed away, but it's now picking up again. Very, very high levels of expansion expected maybe 6-9 months ago. That's again tailing back. Will the two meet again? Who knows? But certainly the general trend is fairly clear from there, I think. Second one, which was really looking at what are the things which are important to your firm. And again, I appreciate nobody's probably going to be able to read what the actual tracks are about, but I'll just talk you through it quickly. Over to the far right, this is positive things. Our leaders are accessible. Far left, our key clients are on track for post-COVID success at 0%. And our firm is on track for post-COVID is around about the 40%. So there's a very big disconnect for that. You can see these slides as usual on the infographics. So I won't bother to go through them in any more detail. The other one I'll just quickly show you is the management activities which you consider helping your firm achieve its goals. Over to the right, communicating effectively, making change happen, getting the best from your team, understanding, motivating others, and making decisions. And that's done at about 5 different quarterly points. So you can see there isn't very many, there's not much shifts there. There's a pretty clear focus that people-centric activities are the ones that contribute most. And around, again, the working, the 1st of October, the 30th of September is the dark blue. So that's nudging up 71% in the middle there. Over to the right is all the time at home. That's pretty small. None of the time at home is 0. and then most of it sitting sort of between around a quarter and around half the time. So that's kind of, so that's some feedback. Thank you very much for completing it last week. That was great. So I will now hand over to our first guest, who, as I mentioned earlier, is Eddie Bowman. And Eddie's coming to talk to us today about a very important topic, which is strategies and programs that drive revenue. Over to you, Eddie.
Thank you. And in almost impossible task, I think, to cover a topic this broad in 5 minutes, but I'm determined to not go over time. So what I'm going to do is just give you 4 very, very simple thoughts, really, or buckets of activity that might be helpful. And none of them are rocket science. Most of this is utterly common sense, seems to me. The first bucket of activity, particularly as we may be entering another very difficult economic time, is just to focus on stopping doing the rubbish. I'm sure everybody on this show probably knows that when they look at what they and their teams are doing in any particular day or week or month, there's an awful lot of it that they really don't need to do. And if you want to get focused on revenue, then you just need to cut out the chaff. We did quite a lot of work at Simmons around how much of our time in leadership meetings and how busy our agendas were with internal items. And I'm not saying they are in any way unimportant, but if you want to drive revenue, you need to just be laser focused on the marketplace and clients. It's just so obvious, but often not delivered. Second thought, which is almost contradictory with the first, is that I think there is always massive potential to drive revenue through what I would call tactical programs. And just to take an example from Simmons, from the legal sector, we have a very good regulatory practice. Every time there is a regulatory change or the FCA decides that it wants to think about changing its regulatory framework in some way or another, there is massive potential in there to drive revenue, simply because these things are always convoluted, they're always time pressured. Our clients never have the time or the space to consider and think about them properly. And you can plow into those tactical, time-constrained conversations with very, very sensible sets of outputs that you can charge for. And I could bore you with some examples, but I won't. So second thought is don't forget the tactics. Third thought, which is again stating the bleeding obvious, is we tend to do too much in professional services. We tend to go to market with too many initiatives. So focus on the fewer and the bigger and the better. We developed a program actually at EY, actually at Anderson, called Big Rocks, which was really a way of ensuring that every year we develop 4 multi-layered strategic programs designed to show off what we knew about the areas of our business we thought were really important. Don't forget them, particularly in times of strife, because they will deliver reputational opportunities and relationship opportunities as well as revenue. And then the last one, I'm doing quite well because I've only done 3.5 minutes, is really for people just to consider, and it's very much focused on the legal industry. So apologies for those of you that are not in the legal industry, but it may be relevant. It does seem to me that if we want to drive sustainable revenue in the future and more of it, we need to get a handle on what I would call the collaboration conundrum. I'm amazed how within the legal industry, we still fail to take the whole firm, the whole of our firm to a particular client and deploy all of our knowledge and expertise with a particular client. And there are a number of fundamental reasons why we don't do that, that get to the way we remunerate our partners and our people, that get to the way we hire our partners and our people, and that get to the way we train and develop them. And it seems to me that the firm that can genuinely collaborate across the different silos within its organization and take those and take the whole firm to solve client problems is going to clean up, because nobody else is doing it. I'm done. 4 minutes, I think. Richard, back to you.
Thanks very much, Eddie. And I like that one about, yeah, you're right. There is a sort of between the cutting out the rubbish, I suppose, is a simple way of thinking about the first one. And then also don't forget the tactics. I mean, those two can at times seem to be going in opposite directions, I guess, but and then cross-selling, which is the word you didn't use, but I suppose could think about in terms of the last one. That to me, again, is something which professional law accountancy firms and consultancy firms have got quite good at that, but law firms find it harder, I think is the way I would put it.
Very
anyway.
hard. Yeah.
So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our second panel for today and welcome Mike Mitster. Mike, as I mentioned earlier, is partner in PSFI. He's also honorary professor in School of Law at Queen Mary University and has recently written a book, which is, I'm just looking at the cover, called From Work Life to New Life, which I'm sure he will be touching on as well. But his theme today is, who are your ambassadors? Over to you, Mike.
Richard, thank you, and a real pleasure to be here. And I'm going to endeavour to follow Eddie's wonderful example to come in and bang on time. So I'd like to touch on a few points. Firstly, the 4 R's, as I am calling them, not the 3 R's, but the 4 R's. A quick just scan over what happened over the last couple of years and where we are now, and why thinking about the ambassadors, those partners who are leaving your firms, really do need some attention. So with my partners, we spend a lot of time out in the marketplace and very surprised often by the ad hoc manner in which partners leave their firms with little or no preparation for what we call their encore. And thinking about life expectancy at the moment, most of those partners will have something to 20 to 25 years of active productive time that they can be using. And yet they're leaving their firms with little or no preparation. Part of that surprise is also that most of the people on this call will be very familiar with the idea of share of wallet. How much of the client's wallet are you able to access? And we know that 5% is both good and bad. If you've got 5% of share of wallet, then actually that's bad news because there's 95% that you haven't got. But it's also good news because it means there's 95% that you could go after. And that's a calculus good managing partners are doing all of the time. But we don't see it applied internally too often. And that takes me to my 4 R's. And so the invitation would be, if you think about the partners who you know are leaving your firm over the next 3 to 5 years, and then profile them. How many of those are holding roles, practice group heads, managing partners, leading big client teams, major client engagements and matters? Second, how many of those partners are essential to the firm's reputation? No, now one individual will not be, but who out of the rest of them are essential to your firm's reputation, Mr. or Mrs., whatever your firm's name. And then crucially, out of those people who are leaving, where are the big relationships and where are the big revenues attached? Are we clear on that? And if we think about the last couple of years, professional service firms in the main have had a pretty good pandemic, and that's not an oxymoron. So certainly on the work front, revenues are up, utilization's been up, and frankly, firms needed just about every able-bodied client server they could get their hands on. In short, Armageddon didn't happen. But something even more remarkable happened. We turned businesses on a sixpence in that time. But something else happened as well. Lots of people were making quiet judgments in the background. We've heard of the Great Resignation. We've heard of quiet quitting. And I was minded that Dame Sharon White, the chair of John Lewis Partnership, said there's 1 million people aged 50 plus who've left the workforce over the last couple of years. UK jobless figures that Richard alluded to as we started, 3.5%, the lowest for 50 years. And the Office of National Statistics telling us that 50% of our workforce is aged over 50. I was chatting to a senior partner the other day who said, this war for talent stuff is nonsense. It's over. War for talent's done. And I looked at them, and they're the head of a major firm. I said, really? And they looked at me and said, oh yeah, talent has won. Now, one of the insidious parts in the back of this is something else has happened, something unseen in a lot of cases. People are adjusting and making choices. And the question I'm asking is, which of your partners are making choices, but they just haven't told you yet that actually, I want out of this. I've made enough, I'm tired, and we're seeing a lot of tiredness in the marketplace. So now, in spite of the economic turmoil, we're heading towards some semblance of trying to get business as usual back on track. And firms are looking at balancing the books, reshaping the pyramid. There's been big pay rises that have hit the bottom line. Inflation is running amok at the moment. We're seeing a lot of pressure on the bottom line. Uncertainty from Brexit is still lurking around, and the ever-present need to drive up profit per equity partner. So amongst those known withdrawals, where do your revenues, relationships, and where do you have leadership at risk? But that's the ones you do know about. And it's worth reflecting, why don't partners put their hands up and say, actually, I'm going in 2 or 3 years' time. There's a fear of losing clients, revenues, not meeting my targets, being excluded, actually compounding the lack of collaboration that Eddie was just talking about, feeling excluded from the partnership business, and crucially, at a personal level, not being clear on what to do next. The big argument I would make is that we should be normalizing the exit process for partners. Why should this be high on the client agenda? On the managing partners agenda, the leadership agenda? Firstly, clients don't like surprises. So if you're going to start changing leadership on teams, it's an opportunity here for smooth transitions. Financially, which revenues have you got at risk, point one, but also the impact on capital flows when you've got partners leaving the business. Thirdly, it demonstrates to the young people in the firm that there is room and headroom for them to grow into, to take on the leadership mantle. For the firm, are you getting the most from those partners who are going to be leaving? The social capital, intellectual capital, the expertise, the wisdom, the knowledge that's in their heads. And then crucially, from a leadership perspective, how do the partners who are remaining see the way their partners who are departing have been treated? What are they saying to each other? Have these people been treated fairly, equitably? Did the partners who are departing act in a manner that was consistent with the partnership ethos? We tend to have big celebrations about new partners when they're coming in. How do we celebrate those who are leaving? Normalizing the exit process. So for the partners themselves too, there are choices to make. What do I do with the 60 to 80 hours a week that I have? And possibly the absolute worst heresy, you can only play so much golf in a week. What do I do with the rest of my time? A big challenge, how do I describe myself going forward when I've left the firm and I am no longer a partner? You can only say to people, well, I used to be a partner in whatever firm for so long. What will my future relationship with the firm be? Or in some cases, do I even want a relationship with the firm? And I've heard that sentiment expressed several times as well. And then the big issue, how do I plan to handle my transition? These are big, life-changing psychological issues. And all of that brings me back to the idea of ambassadors at the end. So all of these things impact the sort of ambassadors who leave your firms. And we all know some of the major consulting firms who trade on the way their former partners are positioned and placed in organizations. So who are your ambassadors? Are they apathetic? They just don't talk about you anymore? Are your ambassadors attackers? Actively out there to any and everybody who will listen, bad-mouthing the firm, saying what a terrible place it was and how poorly they were treated in their last time? Are they assassins? These are the quiet ones who, when they're prodded or poked, or maybe there's been too many gin and tonics or too much wine, will start them, let me tell you about, and will actually deliver devastating broadsides. Or are you sending your former partners out as advocates, ones who are making a great play and telling the world what a great firm they are? So I guess my challenge to the leaders who are listening is, are you creating a vicious cycle or a virtuous circle with those ambassadors who are leaving your firm and heading into a new life? So for me, I think I've managed to come in, Richard, more or less bang on the same time as Eddie. So I'm going to give myself a bit of a gold star for that. So back over to you, Richard, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to people. No,
well, I always think it's interesting that so much condensed wisdom. And when you sort of invite somebody who's actually written a book on the topic to come and share their knowledge, it's just so beautifully presented. So thank you, Mike, for that. I found that was really, really helpful and interesting. Francesca, over to you. We've heard from Eddie talking about his 4, cut out the rubbish, don't forget the tactics, focus on a few projects and try and get the firm to work together, all on the same client. And then you've heard from Mike about ambassadors, the roles, the reputation, the relationship, and the revenues, and keeping those 4 in balance and helping people normalize the whole process of retirement. So you've got a really lovely broad spread of topics to pick up today. So over to you.
I do. Where to begin? Thank you both. Both really excellent and thought-provoking. And I'm just going to pick up a tiny fraction of those points, and then maybe a little bit when we get into the panel, I'll pick up on the 4-day working week as well, which we slightly alluded to at the beginning. Let me just pick up on the parting shot from Eddie about the firm that actually starts making itself really solve people's problems will clean up. And I slightly paraphrase what you said there, Eddie, but there's something really powerful about it because it sounds so simple, and why aren't firms doing it? So I think there's a real challenge for us there, is that I think most firms think they're doing that, but most firms aren't. So what is it that makes a difference? Love to hear more from Eddie on that. And also, I think it's a really good challenge to us, is that actually we might say that we're doing that, we might stand on stages, we may sit in workshops, but is anyone actually positioning themselves in that place? And how are they perceived by the market that they're looking to get? I mean, clients relationship, you get good feedback, you can ask for feedback. What are your potential clients saying about you? Why is it that they might think you are the answer or aren't the answer? And there's something very powerful there about the use of very well tried and tested marketing tools to give you that kind of feedback to help you. So that's one that just really stuck with me. And I've actually just ordered your book, Mike, on Amazon. So just so you know, you've got you've got another copy going out. I actually have a real passion as I get older, as I limp towards retirement, about how badly we treat people when they retire, and how little options there are for people who've been just stalwarts of their firm, hugely successful, massive experience, and then they sort of get thrown out onto the rubbish dump. And some go the Ned route, or the sort of, if you like, the more traditional post-consulting route. But there are so many other options. And I think there's something incredibly smart about how do you keep that relationship with the firm that you probably have the most link to? How can you have a role there that doesn't require a 5-day-a-week timesheet nightmare that they very much don't want, but they still keep that connection and that linkage? And I think smart firms are really beginning to leverage that group of people in a more thoughtful way. And also, I think people want to work longer. They just don't want to work as much. So how do you have that ability to keep working? I mean, gosh, look at that 70th birthday card behind Richard. Some people are working well into their 70s and are loving it and getting a real passion out of it and have something valuable to give. So how do we, as people running our organizations today, make that a viable option without potential new partners thinking, oh, my future's blocked because there's all these more experienced people hanging around? And how do you find a different way of working? And I do think we often sever our ties And that person, if it feels great grievance about how they've been treated, and really feels that all that experience and value they've given to an organization has been pushed aside, and they find it very difficult to deal with that. But also, I think from an organizational point of view, a lot of that knowledge just walks out the door, and is lost forever, which is terribly sad. So I think there's something incredibly powerful about that. And I do like your ambassador quote, because you always want, whenever someone leaves, you want them to be a raving advocate for your firm, to be out there shouting about, yeah, I left because I wanted to go and do these other things, but they were a great firm. You should use them as an advisor. They're a really valuable firm to be part of. I'm really glad I work for them, even though I don't work for them anymore. Nothing wrong with that. People move. It's not a crime. But when people leave, let them leave with a real passion for your organization, and let them be those ambassadors, even if you're sad they've gone. Let them still be the ambassadors for you. And I think people who've had a great experience will always say positive things about the place they've left, and how they leave often dictates what that looks like. So really, really interesting insight, and we need to get better at the whole. I mean, it's not really retirement, is it? It's just a different way of working, and I love that kind of concept. Back to you, Richard.
Oh, thanks very much. And Eddie, just picking up Francesca's question around why is it so hard for firms to actually come together and serve a client from across the whole firm? What are the things that are standing in the way of that collaboration, in your view?
Well, look, give me a fact that I think is really interesting, and this is obviously from from Simmons, which is a mid-ranking, I guess, global law firm. Our top client spends somewhere around $500 million on legal services, and we pat ourselves on the back because we maybe get 20 million. I mean, that's pathetic, and we never think in that way. We think, oh, aren't we doing well? Our revenues are up from 18 to 20 million. It's just extraordinary. I think there are a whole raft of reasons. I'll give you three. The first one is, and this is very specifically for the law, and I recognize from my EY days that the consultants are ahead of the game. They're certainly ahead of the legal game. The first one is, we do not reward people to be collaborative. We just don't. It's an eat what you kill culture. The second one is, we don't hire people that find it easy to collaborate. We go for massive intellect, and we go for introverts. And most lawyers just love being surrounded by pieces of paper, or sometimes computer screens, and don't really like people. That's not a good way, to start to collaborate. And then the third thing is, all of the training we give them from the moment they arrive is about deepening their legal technical specialism. It's not about understanding how businesses work or looking at the breadth of an issue. It's about looking at the depth of some specialist challenge. And I observed that a bit in the Big Four as well. Big Four partners popped out and they were absolutely brilliant at transfer pricing, but not many of them could talk about other stuff. Now, that's a horrible generalization, but so I think it's just not surprising. We're doing pretty much everything wrong. And I challenge slightly the idea that we even think we're delivering on this objective. We don't need to deliver on it because there's enough swill in the trough for everybody to make enough money. That's the brutal truth of it. And I'd say that's probably the same, Francesca, in your side of the park as it is in the legal side of the park. So there you go.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Eddie. Perhaps turning to Mike now, and this idea of normalization. To what extent do you think that we are, how shall I put it, understanding what best practice looks like? What are some of the firms that have got it right doing that's different, do you find?
I think the firms that are getting it right are doing things to support. They're building programmatic interventions, which are offering partners choices, and bringing in externals to talk about things like what it really means to be a non-executive director, headhunters in terms of how to reshape your CV and to position yourself in the marketplace going forward. providing they've got the political infrastructure right, that it's okay for partners to put their hand up. So I think there's a big piece of work there that is done by the leadership teams, particularly the chairman, senior partner, in conjunction with their executive teams to do that. We see a degree of one-to-one support, which is far more usual than programmatic interventions. And I think for the partners who are exiting, for those who are brave enough to join together in small groups, 2s, 3s, or 4s within an office or a jurisdiction, to work together to start building stuff, to start, and the phrase we use in our firm is normalizing the exit process. So this is just part of what happens when you get to the age as dictated in the deed or as agreed, and what is the lead time into that. So a rambling answer, Richard, but hopefully that goes to some clues.
Great. And perhaps moving back to Francesca now, and the 4-day week, and how do you think that might fit in with somebody who's looking at retirement, or do you think this is more of a general topic?
I think this is more of a general topic, because I think if you're heading into that retirement stage, a 4-day week might not cut it for you. You might want more time than that. But some fascinating work going on this. And if you want to see how the research is panning out, if you just plug 4-day working week into the internet, you'll easily find the research around it. There's a big project ongoing, about 2,000 firms, I think, give or take, involved in it. Not many professional services firms, though, I hasten to add, but a range of firms looking at a 6-month trial. Does it work? What does it mean for productivity? What's the practicalities of it? Some really interesting early research coming out about how it's driving efficiency, how it's driving different productivity. And there's some really nice myth-busting elements to it about it's not about only working 4 days, it's about condensed hours. So you're doing a slightly condensed week into 4 days. So I think it's something like 28 to 30 hours a week rather than the 35 to 40 that many professionals would do. It's also really interesting just to see how people are managing the practicalities, because I think one of the biggest challenges for client-facing individuals is how do you cope with a day when that core person isn't there? How do you manage that? Who covers? Do you effectively have to have good duplication of client knowledge, which you kind of need anyway, but how do you manage that interaction with a client on the day that person isn't around? So I think it's really early days about how you can get it to work, but it's a fascinating series of projects. Many firms are looking at it as both a talent attractor and a talent retention tool. And if you go back to when the 5-day working week became the norm, it was predicated on very different times and very different working practices. So it's a good chance to challenge ourselves about whether 5 days a week still makes sense. I think it's also reflective of our desire to find a better way to deal with hybrid working. Unlimited holiday is another route that many are looking at. Days where you try and find a way to get teams to come together. And I just think it just shows how much thinking is going into this space at the moment, but also how hard it is to find a one-size-fits-all answer. The reality you come to after looking at all of this research is there is no single way of picking it up, lifting it, shifting it, and doing it in your business. You have to find something that works for your, what often is very unique set of circumstances, and teams within an organization might have very different circumstances as well. So I think that's the massive challenge for leadership is, are you comfortable having different types of approach in different areas of your business? Because what works in one doesn't work in another. So it takes you back to the role of leadership and management. You having to be far more engaged, far more involved, think far deeper about how you can make this all work. And it is a more complicated system, undoubtedly, than the sort of the old-fashioned 9 to 5, 5 days a week approach that had a simplicity to it and a consistency to it that isn't probably going to cut it in the years going forward. So just fascinating, and I think there's a lot more to hear about it, Richard, as time goes on.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll come back to that topic on a fairly regular basis somehow. Perhaps asking Eddie now, and this is more, I think, Eddie, appreciate you were just left Simmons, you were at EY, Anderson and others. And to what extent did you find that there was the possibility for people to work a 4-day week, particularly in the area of marketing, which I know is typically far more women than men? in terms of the makeup of the people who work there. Is that something you found thinking through as a sort of chief marketing officer roles through the years? Has been something you tried to help people with, wanted to work a bit less time, children, looking after kids, whatever it happened to be? Is that something you've got any thoughts on?
Oh, just dramatic change in the last 5 years, exacerbated by COVID, so that, you know, now well, certainly in my last role, we bent over backwards to make working life as flexible as it could possibly be. And that's a sea change. I think, you know, 10 years ago, it just didn't really exist. And I think we've made massive strides to give people opportunities to make their work within their life and where they are in their lives. And I think that's wholeheartedly positive. The only thing I would say, and this probably makes me sound terribly old-fashioned, is I think there has to be the right amount of give and take. So I don't care if somebody just needs to take, you know, time out for weeks on end because they've got something going on in their life. I don't care if they're working, you know, they sign up to working 3 days a week, say, but there are periods of time when you have to put the business first. And I think you have to recognize that is the case. And there are periods of time in your career where you just have to put yourself out there and park some other stuff. Now, I'm not entirely sure, it's going to make me very unpopular with the under 35s, that age group understands that. They like the flexibility, but they're not always keen on the give back. So I'm looking forward to receiving the hate mail as a result of that statement.
They're all struggling with their quarter life crisis, you could argue. Of course, that's the other dimension, isn't it?
As we all are.
Mike, picking back ambassadors now, if I may, and it's a term that's used, I know, by various people, and you talked about apathetic ambassadors, attackers, and assassins. And to what extent do you think you choose your ambassadors, or do you find that your people are automatically ambassadors for you anyway? So it's more about making sure that they are saying hopefully positive things about you. How to much extent can you manage an ambassador program, do you think?
I think you can make big headway into it, Richard. And my reasoning for that is that behavior tends to beget behavior. And so how people are treated has a big impact, not just on them, but also how their colleagues are seeing them. So if people are treated well, and I've used the word in inverted commas, and you have to fill that in the context of what being treated well means for each firm, to pick up on Francesca's theme from earlier, then I think you can and you will have people going into the marketplace with a very positive mindset. But it's about, I think, a co-development of what that means with them. It's about treating them as grown-ups, not doing things to them. When I first started to get into this work, I remember one managing partner saying to me, look, Mike, whatever you're planning on doing here, don't try and do it to us. We've spent 30 years running this firm. Help us do it for ourselves and for the firm. And I think that for me, that's the key, that if people are engaged in this, if they've been treated well over the last few years and are engaged in the process themselves, then you will have people speaking very positively. But it does need that to be part of a conscious effort. It's not something that just happens. I'm reminded of the old Peter Drucker quote that says, there's only 3 things that happen naturally in organization: confusion, inefficiency, and underperformance. Everything else takes leadership. And it takes leadership to actually fix that. And I'm not sure I got the Drucker quote quite right, but it's one of my heroes, but it's something along those lines.
But no, it's interesting. I was thinking Drucker is all about culture, isn't it, of course, as well. And what we're really talking about here is building the culture for the firm to be able to treat its people, as Eddie is describing, in a very more thoughtful way, but also helping them disengage in an equally thoughtful way. And that is definitely a function of leadership, I think, in many ways. Right, we've now come to that point of the show where I'm going to be asking each of the panel. I'll just go to a gallery view. So I'm going to be asking each of the panel to share with us, and well, with the audience in general, what's the one thing that you have the insight you've had from today, the thing that you kind of, somebody said something or you thought of something that really said, actually, that's a really interesting thought. Just ideally 1 point. What's the one thing that you think you've heard today that's really worth sharing generally? I'll start with Mike, if I may. Just Mike, what's the, sorry to pull the card, the short straw there, but what's the one thing that you kind of heard today from somebody around the table or in your own prep that you think is really worth sharing for the audience?
I was very taken with Eddie's comment about stop doing the rubbish. I think we advocate people to stop doing non-productive things, but to just actually, let's talk about it in the vernacular, shall we? Stop doing the rubbish. And I just think that really resonated for me.
Brilliant. Eddie, what's your one takeaway?
Oh, I absolutely love the unlimited holidays idea. I think that's a real winner, isn't it, really? Not sure how you run a business around it, but brilliant.
Well, my daughter works for a firm which has no holiday limits at all. She works very hard, actually. So I think it is about people. You hire people who can manage in that culture, I suspect. And finally, Francesca, what's your one takeaway from today?
Well, oh gosh, there's so many, but I'm going to go with the put yourself in a position where the people who leave are raving advocates for you, make them ambassadors. And it sounds so simple, and yet we do it really badly. So let's make sure that one happens. That was a great tip.
Fabulous. Well, we're now at 10 o'clock, so I'm afraid that's the end of today's show. Thank you all hugely for being with us. It's been a great audience as always. And thank you for completing the poll. We'll get those results up quite soon together with the videos. Thank you to Mike for helping us understand why actually we're looking at almost like Shakespeare's 7 stages of man, I think. So don't forget that each of them is equally important. And to Eddie for just reminding us that actually focus and strategy are really, really important if you want to have an effective, efficient firm. So on those happy notes, I will thank you all. Thank you for Francesca for Thoughts on the 4-Day Week, which I know will return time and time again. So 2 weeks time, we'll be back with another panel and look forward to that. Over to you all now. Bye for now.